I'm Sara Goldvine, and this is Let's Talk Housing, a podcast by BC Housing. In this space, we explore the complex systemic issues that make it challenging for many people in British Columbia to access and afford a home. The provincial government has an ambitious plan with the largest investment in housing affordability in BC's history. Tasked with helping deliver on this plan is BC Housing, which is working with hundreds of partners to develop, manage, and administer a wide range of affordable housing and homelessness services in hundreds of communities across the province. In this podcast, you'll hear from those delivering innovative and exciting affordable housing solutions. Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Housing. I'm Sara Goldvine. Today, we will be talking about the importance of homelessness shelter services for women. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are recording today's episode from the homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and from the territory of the Kamloops. We offer our respect to their peoples, past and present. Also, in full transparency, we are recording this episode in November of 2022. Joining us today on Let's Talk Housing is Katie Hutchins with the Kamloops chapter of the Mustard Seed, a faith-based nonprofit that offers supports and services to people experiencing homelessness and poverty in 5 cities across Western Canada. This fall, the Mustard Seed opened Harbour House, a new shelter that provides a safe place to stay for women. This is the first shelter of its kind in Kamloops. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you.
Let's start by just talking a little bit about Harbour House. Can you tell us, tell our listeners about Harbour House? What do you do and how are you helping women?
Yeah, for sure. So thank you so much for having me. The Harbour House opened almost a month ago, so October 11th of 2022. It is a 12-bed facility for women or individuals identifying as female. And the space has wraparound services for individuals. So we have a full shower facility, laundry. It's staffed 24/7. All of the meals are included. And our goal is just for it to be a safe space for individuals. So we do have sort of the pod model set up. So that means each individual gets their own bed, their own little nightstand, kind of their own private space, which is a little bit different than our traditional shelter setup. And yeah, individuals can stay as long as they want to. So there's no time limit on their stay. We've had one guest who's been there since we've opened, which is awesome. And yeah, that's kind of the overview.
So this is the first shelter of its kind in Kamloops. We do have a small number of women-only shelters across the province, but it's relatively unusual to have this kind of an approach. Can you tell us a little bit where the idea came from for this dedicated shelter for women?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a few ways it came about. There's a few different people that were really involved in kind of bringing this idea to life. One being our managing director. He was previously involved with the New Life mission, which merged with the Mustard Seed, I think in 2018 or 2017. And the New Life mission had a shelter called the House of Ruth. And the House of Ruth was really a recovery-based home for women so they could kind of work through their addiction and journey through that with staff on site. And that was something that unfortunately had to close down due to funding. And so for him, that was something that was like, he was really passionate about that. And bringing something like that back because he saw so many great successes come out of that. For me personally, I've volunteered a lot with women-specific services, the vulnerable population, and I know that there are a lot of marginalized women out there that aren't seen as much. And sometimes when we look at some of our data, they're not captured as well as maybe they could be. So it was something we kind of, we talk about like, oh, how great would it be if we had like a women's only shelter? And, and as we're going through some of our programs, we realized that some of our guests or our community members, they didn't have the services that they needed. And sometimes they didn't even feel comfortable coming to our co-ed services. So it kind of was a few things. And then eventually we had a space in our building and we were like, what can we do with this space? It's not an ideal space. It's a basement. So when we were first looking at it, we were like, how can we bring life to this space? And then through chatting with BC Housing, which is our partner on the project, we were kind of able to bring the opportunity forward and then just brought it to life. And it was great. It was really awesome.
Yeah. So you mentioned you've worked with women for quite some time, and we know that when people think about emergency housing for women, many folks might be more familiar with transition housing. So for women fleeing violence, how is Harbour House different than transition housing?
Yeah, so for us, we really want it to be a safe space for people to land. And I think one of the core hopes for shelter space is that it's a safe space for someone to kind of just like take a deep breath, if you will. So a lot of people, if you're constantly worrying about where you're going to sleep, where your next meal is coming from, it's really hard to imagine the next steps of your life, right? So maybe it's getting a job, or maybe it's, going to a court date, or whatever it is. It's really hard to do that if you're living in this survival mode. So for Harbour House, we don't really specify in any specific need because we want anyone to be able to come to this space. So some examples so far, we've had some folks come and they just are trying to get back to like the East Coast. They're trying to get back to their family and they have no place to stay. So they're just staying with us for 1 or 2 days while they wait for their bus to leave. We have some other individuals who are trying to get into detox and they have to wait, right? And that's a big thing in our community in the interior, is we have a lot of folks that would like to go to detox and they don't have a space to wait, to stay safe before they can get into that program. So yeah, that's kind of one of the main differences, I think, is we don't really just specify on the normal, like fleeing the violence. Yeah, it's a spot for everyone.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you've been open for about a month. And you've had some guests that have stayed with you for quite some time. And then, as you said, some others that have really just been there for a night or two. What things are you hearing from your guests, from the women that stay with you?
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful because you can see the ones who have stayed since closer to the beginning, just the sense of ease they're starting to have, and they're starting to be able to think about, okay, like what do I want to do next? Like what do I want for my life? And just the sense of empowerment that they're feeling, I think is really incredible. When we first opened, I was down in the space and one individual, a new person had come in and she was telling her about everything. And she was like, yeah, when you walk into the bathroom, the lights just come on. They're automatic and the staff are so kind. And just like hearing her explain to someone else, like her peer, right? This is a great spot, and just encouraging her. And just seeing that sort of community being built down there has been really incredible. And it's not a fit for everyone. Some folks come in for a night and they aren't able to stay, and that's okay. But yeah, like a lot of the people are feeling like that real sense of building relationships and being able to think beyond where they are right now and into those next steps. And the community has been super supportive, which is incredible.
So, Katie, you mentioned that many of these women who are staying with you have come from some pretty difficult circumstances, and you're telling us about really a sense of community. That must be difficult to do. How do you and your team create a space where folks can feel really welcome and feel that sense of belonging?
I think a huge part of it is good people. Having good people, not just our community members accessing the service, but also staff that are providing the care. Part of my role that I really enjoy is the human resources, so the recruitment and the training of individuals. So I do think that it's been really great to see people coming in that really want to be a part of something and they really want to make a difference. And a lot of our staff do have lived experience as well. So they're able to relate sort of to those, like you spoke to, like those situations that aren't very common, or we think maybe aren't as common as they are. But yeah, some of the more tangible things we've done is when we have meals, we have sort of like a makeshift dinner table that we set up and everyone eats together. We'll try to do different community activities. So whether that's watching a movie together or doing crafts or some of those things that I think most people don't think about being a privilege, but it is, right? Like sitting down and just being able to color on a piece of paper, like we can just do that whenever we want, right? And if you're someone who doesn't have that space, you don't have the money to buy it, like it can feel really great and it can feel very calming. And yeah, it builds some trust with the group. So yeah, those are some of the ways we've done that. We've built that community.
I'm sure that part of what you're describing here is really bringing that trauma-informed approach. And we use this term in this sector, right? Talking about trauma-informed services. Can you talk a little bit about what it means for the mustard seed to provide trauma-informed services for women who are accessing your services like this?
Yeah, it's super important. And I think it's something that's kind of becoming more I don't know if popular is the right word, but like popular in our society is talking more about trauma and what that means and sort of our individual traumas. And a lot of individuals we service do come from the Indigenous population. So recognizing that trauma, right? And the generational trauma that may come with that. And then also just recognizing a lot of these women have been in very vulnerable situations in their life. Especially, some of the ones that maybe have substance abuse, like we're learning more and more things about that, right? As time goes on. But one thing we always encourage people is to look at someone as an individual and how they respond to something. It might not be them responding, right? It might be their trauma responding, and just understanding that everyone is unique. So for example, when someone comes into the shelter, we do an intake process with them. And part of their intake process is coming up with goals. So like some long-term goals. And so one thing we've had to talk to our staff about is, when someone first comes in, they might not have long-term goals, right? They might not be able to kind of conceptualize that. So giving someone the patience and the grace to just be like, okay, let's check in again tomorrow. And just that consistency is really important. And again, understanding that not everyone's going to have the same goals, and that's okay. And I mean, one thing I talk to the team a lot about is understanding our own trauma as well, because there are a lot of things that can be triggering in this workforce. And it's really good to recognize that before you go into it. So yeah, I think that's a big one.
That self-awareness is so crucial for folks who are working in this space, for sure. Of course, you've got the community inside inside Harbour House, and then you've got the community around it as well. How have your guests really responded to the community that they're coming into, and how has the community helped create a welcoming space for these residents?
Yeah, they've been pretty good. One thing that's kind of handy is it's already in a location where we're already operating. So we have really good relationships with most of our neighbors where we kind of talk to them. We make sure they have access to us if there are ever any issues. We sort of give them an idea of what we're doing in this space. But yeah, we've just been able to connect with a lot of different services so we can kind of triage folks if we need to. Because I think during COVID and even before that, sometimes we get siloed into like what we're doing in our community. And we feel like we can't work together. And that's been a big thing that I've found really beautiful about Harbour House is we've been able to kind of build that network and say like, okay, here's this person and we might not be able to service all of their needs. So who can do that in our community? And like, how are we going to, pass them off, if you will, and still walk with them on that journey, but not just leave them like, oh, sorry, we don't do that. We're just going to step away now. And also just working to educate our neighbors that aren't in the social sector. Like, hey, this might seem really weird to you and you might not understand why we're taking this approach, but here's why. They've been really great and really receptive to that. So I think we're really grateful for that.
We hear a lot about opposition to services for folks who are experiencing homelessness. So it's nice to also talk about neighbors that help support these services. What type of impact do you think that this shelter is going to have for the community of Kamloops?
I mean, hopefully it saves lives, right? The goal is to bring hope and to save individuals from what could happen. I think for me personally, the hope is that it just builds a safe space for individuals. I mean, right now, housing is a pretty big concern, and shelters aren't meant to be lived in forever. But for some folks, that's that's kind of the only option for them right now. So just offering that safe space where we can work with people on an individual level. And my hope is that the community just comes around and sort of champions that for us and just really like walks alongside of this community. I just think it's been a really tough last few years for people. And I just hope more people are engaged with sort of why someone might be accessing a service like this and more empathetic.
All right, Katie, I'd like to squeeze in one more question. Based on your experience with Harbour House, what advice would you provide to other nonprofits that might be considering opening a women's shelter like the one you have in Kamloops?
I would say talk to people and involve them. I think one key thing we did is we sat down as a team and sort of brought in our different people from different areas. So like our advocate, our outreach workers, we brought in some of our staff that had lived experience and just sort of talked to them about, okay, is this realistic? Like, what does this look like? Because I think sometimes, and for me, coming from the admin background, we want things to look really nice. So we're like, okay, like this looks good, this policy and this is going to do A, C, and B. But for some individuals, that's not realistic. So just like having different people at the table who are really experienced, whether it's life experience, educational experience, or work experience, and just sitting down together is really important. And involving your community, because we can't do things alone, and we don't want to do things alone, right? Like we want to involve everyone. And even if it's, the public sector or your neighbor who's maybe a supermarket or something, like just get everyone involved and make sure you hear everyone out if you can. It is time consuming, but taking the time to really just make it a community effort is, I think, really important.
What a wonderful place to end things on. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us more about Harbour House. Let's talk again soon. To learn more about BC Housing or to apply for subsidized housing in British Columbia, visit our website at bchousing.org.